The mountains had been quiet that day. Too quiet for Elias Kane's liking. Snow was coming. He could feel it in his bones, the way old men claim they could. The air had that heavy stillness, the kind that presses against your skin and makes the world feel muted. The pine trees stood in rigid ranks along the ridge, their tops swaying just enough to creak in protest. Elias pulled his fur-lined coat tighter, tugging the collar up against the sharp bite of the wind. His traps had been light this week, hares. Too smart, foxes too wary, and he was heading home with little more than a pair of snowshoe rabbits dangling from his belt. Still, he knew the mountains gave what they pleased and took back just as quickly. You didn't curse them. You respected them. He crested the rise overlooking the old military outpost, a squat shape half swallowed by snowdrifts and shadows. No. One had used it in years, at least not anyone with lawful business. Its roof sagged under the weight of too many hard winters, shingles curling like old bark. He would have passed it without a second glance if not for the flicker of movement on the far side. At first he thought it was a loose tarp caught in the wind. But tarps didn't sway like that. They didn't struggle. Elias squinted, one gloved, hand shading his eyes. The light was fading fast, dusk's blue shadows climbing up the hills. What he saw made him stop dead. Someone was hanging from the edge of the roof. A woman. Blonde hair whipped wildly in the wind, catching what little light remained, flashing gold against the bruised sky. Her arms were bound above her head, her body limp but twitching with the occasional spasm of pain. For a second, he thought she might already be dead. But then her head lifted just slightly, and her eyes pale, wide, frantic locked on his. Elias's pulse kicked hard against his ribs. He didn't waste time wondering who she was or how she got there. He started down the slope, his boots sinking deep into the powder, legs burning as he pushed through. The closer he came, the more details sharpened, and each one made his jaw clench tighter. Her lips were split and bloodied. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, exposing skin blistered and raw. And there, scorched into her flesh in jagged, angry letters, were the words, "Apache Lover." The mark was fresh, angry red, edges still wet with the shine of half-healed burns. He'd seen branding before, on cattle, on horses, on people. Only once, and that memory had haunted him for years. He reached the wall of the outpost, glancing up to see how she was tied. A thick hemp rope bit into her wrists, looped over a beam and anchored to a rusted iron ring. The knots were crude but tight, made for humiliation, not speed. Elias slung his rifle across his back and dug his hunting knife from its sheath. The woman flinched when he raised his hand toward her, a hoarse, panicked sound catching in her throat. "Easy," he said, voice low and steady. His words seemed to reach her through the fog of pain. Her eyes softened just a fraction, though. Her breathing stayed ragged. He sawed through the rope, the fibers snapping one by one until her weight sagged forward into his arms. She was lighter than he expected fever light, bones wrapped in little more than torn cloth and grit. Her head rested briefly against his chest, and he caught the faint scent of smoke in her hair. Smoke and fear. Carefully, he shifted her into a carry, one arm behind her knees, the other cradling her back. Her skin was hot against the cold air, fevered. She tried to speak, but only a cracked whisper came out, a sound more like wind through dead leaves than a voice. "We'll talk later," he muttered, already moving. His cabin was still a mile away, and night was falling fast. The trail was treacherous in the dark, especially with the storm rolling in. But leaving her there wasn't an option. He could feel her trembling against him, every shiver a reminder that she was still alive for now. By the time he reached the tree line, snow had begun to fall in thin, needling flakes. The wind moaned through the branches overhead, carrying with it the distant howl of a wolf. Elias didn't slow. His cabin's glow faint, golden finally broke through the darkness ahead. When he crossed the threshold, the warmth from the fire was like a punch against the cold in his bones. He set her gently down on the fur-covered bed, brushing snow from her hair. For a moment, she looked at him as if she didn't believe she was safe. Then her eyes fluttered shut, and she went limp. Elias stood there, his breath heavy in the quiet cabin. The image of that cruel brand burned itself into his mind. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted her gone, they'd wanted her shamed, destroyed. He had a feeling that bringing her here might have just set his own quiet life on fire. But as he looked at her small, broken, and yet somehow still holding on, the storm hit hard and fast. By the time Elias had hung his coat by the door and stoked the fire, the wind was screaming down the chimney, rattling the shutters like an angry hand. Snowflakes whirled past the small frosted windows, erasing the mountains beyond into a blur of white nothing. Inside, the only sound was the steady crackle of the logs and the faint, uneven rasp of the woman's breathing. She lay where he'd placed her, curled slightly on her side, the firelight throwing flickering gold over her bruised face. Elias crouched beside the bed, studying her with a hunter's patience. She was young mid-20s maybe, but hardship had etched fine lines at the corners of her mouth and eyes. Her skin, beneath the grime and the cruel burn, was pale as snow. Her hair, freed from whatever had once bound it, spilled over the founder, pillow in waves dulled by dirt and ash. She didn't look like someone who belonged out here in the wild. She looked like someone from the town, someone used to church pews, not pine needles. He filled a tin cup with water from the kettle and coaxed her to drink. Her lips trembled as she took it, each swallow slow and careful. When she was done, she gave a faint nod, as though the simple act had taken all her strength. "You've got fever," Elias said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Need to keep you warm. That storm's not letting up for days." She watched him, eyes half-lidded, cautious. He knew that look. It was the same one he'd worn years ago when strangers offered kindness he wasn't sure he could trust. He fetched a clean cloth from the cupboard, dipped it into warm water, and began gently wiping the blood and dirt from her skin. She flinched once when the cloth brushed the branded letters on her shoulder. Her breathing hitched, and she turned her face away. "I'm not here to hurt you," Elias murmured. The words seemed to loosen something in her. Not much, but enough for her to whisper, "They said I was with them." Her voice was a threadbare thing, frayed by thirst and fear. "With who?" Elias asked. Her eyes flickered to his, sharp for a moment despite the exhaustion. "The Apache." She said it like a confession, but there was steel beneath the shame. "I wasn't. Not like they said. She stopped, jaw tightening. "I only tried to save them." Elias didn't press her right away. Instead, he set the cloth aside and ladled stew into a small wooden bowl. The smell of rabbit and wild onions filled the cabin. He helped her sit, easing the blanket around her shoulders. She ate slowly, each bite deliberate, as though she didn't quite believe there'd be another. Between mouthfuls, she began to speak in halting pieces. Her name was Clara Beaumont. She'd grown up in a settlement a day's ride south an outpost, clinging to the edge of Apache territory. When she was 16, the Apache had raided the town, taking food but sparing lives. Ever since, the settlers had lived in uneasy truce. But tensions rose again when cattle went missing and a rancher's son turned up dead. The town blamed the Apache. "I knew it wasn't them," Clara said, staring into the fire as if afraid of the memory in his eyes. "I'd seen tracks white men's boots, not moccasins, but no one listened. They wanted blood." Elias could hear the bitterness in her voice. He'd heard it before in veterans, in widows, in himself. "The night it happened," she went on, "I saw them coming. Men from our town, rifles, torches. They were going to wipe out a whole camp, families. Her hands tightened around the bowl. I ran ahead, warned them. Got the women and children to the hills. She swallowed, her voice dropping low. When I came back, they were waiting for me. They said I'd betrayed my own, said I was their woman. Elias's gaze drifted to the brand again. The words on her skin weren't just meant to punish, they were meant to erase her life, make her an outcast forever. Your fiancé, Elias said, watching her reaction. She flinched, just slightly. He was with them? She nodded, jaw trembling. He led them. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, tears welled in her eyes. I thought he loved me, but he wanted me gone more than any of them. Said I made the town weak, said I. She couldn't finish. Outside, the wind roared against the cabin walls, a sound like the world closing in. Elias sat back, letting the fire's heat soak into his tired bones. He didn't know yet whether every word she spoke was the truth, but he knew this much. Whoever Clara Beaumont was, she didn't deserve what had been done to her. He'd seen guilty eyes before, and hers weren't guilty. They were hunted. From the corner of his window, he caught movement down the trail. A faint glimmer in the dark torchlight, distant but moving. His shoulders tightened. Riders. They'd found her trail dot when he turned back. Clara was watching him with those pale, searching eyes. You're not sending me back, she said softly. It wasn't. The storm hadn't driven them back. If anything, it seemed to have pushed them forward like wolves that had caught a scent too fresh to abandon. Elias could see the flicker of their torches now, more than one, maybe half a dozen, weaving through the dark tree line far below his cabin. The sight didn't surprise him. The timing did. Men like that usually waited for daylight, but vengeance burned hotter than caution. He stepped back from the window, careful not to let the glow of the fire silhouette him. Clara's eyes followed him, wide but steady. They'll come, she said quietly, as if naming the truth might make it easier to face. They won't stop until they've got me. Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed the cabin, knelt by the hearth, and fed another log into the flames. The wind howled as if in protest, rattling the latch on the door. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, flat, more thought than speech. They're not lawmen, Clara shook her head. No, vigilantes. They think they are the law. She set the empty stew bowl aside, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. The one leading them, his name's Raymond Hawley. Her. Words faltered, and she glanced toward the fire. I was supposed to marry him. The air between them thickened. Elias leaned back against the wall, folding his arms. And he's the one who put the brand on you. She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes was enough. He'd seen this before, settlers turning on their own when fear made them mean. It was easier to destroy a scapegoat than face the truth. And if a man like Hawley wanted the mob to believe a woman had betrayed them, he'd make sure no other story could survive. Clara hesitated, then began to speak again, voice trembling but clear. I once found a boy, Apache, maybe 12 years old. He'd been shot, left to die in the sagebrush. I brought him water, took him to the edge of the river so his people could find him. She paused, her gaze locking on Elias's. That's the only thing I ever did, but to them it was enough. Elias studied her for a long moment. He didn't see a liar. He saw someone carrying the weight of an old decision that had cost her everything. He knew that kind of weight knew how it could twist a person's life until the past felt like a noose. The glow of the torches below flickered out for a moment, swallowed by the forest. Then they reappeared, brighter now, closer. Elias's mind began moving through the terrain like a map. The trail wound narrow up the east side, steep enough to slow horses but not stop them. The western slope was worse jagged rock and ice, but it had blind spots a man could use. If they came before dawn, he'd have to make a choice: hide her or fight. "You know they'll kill you," Elias said finally. Her reply came without hesitation. "I know." She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply met his eyes and spoke as if stating the weather. But there was something else in her gaze, something like defiance, faint but unbroken. Outside, the snow had thickened into a blinding white wall. The torchlight blurred, then sharpened again as the riders pressed on. They were relentless. Elias had seen that kind of hunt before, back in the war, men chasing a target not because of justice, but because without the kill, they couldn't live with their own rage. Clara shifted on the bed, wincing as the burn on her shoulder brushed the blanket. Her voice was softer when she spoke again. "When they caught me, they didn't just brand me. They cut my hair, made me stand in the street while they shouted what I'd done." Her hands clenched under the blanket. "Raymond told them I was worse than a thief, worse than a killer. Said I'd brought the Apache into our homes." She shook her head slowly. The truth didn't matter. Elias thought about that as he crossed the room to check his rifle. He pulled it from its place by the door, ran a quick claw through the barrel, and laid it on the table beside a box of cartridges. Every sound outside felt sharper now: the hiss of the wind, the faint creak of snow-laden branches, the distant jingle of horse tack. "They're getting close," he said. Clara's breath caught, but she didn't move from the bed. She only asked one question: "What will you do?" He didn't answer right away. He'd been living alone for years, keeping his head down, avoiding every scrap of trouble the world tried to send his way. But trouble had found him anyway. And now there was a woman in his cabin with fire in her eyes and a brand on her skin, and a pack of men out there who wouldn't hesitate to spill blood. When he finally spoke, the wind didn't ease through the night. It pressed against the cabin walls like an invisible weight, moaning through the cracks, making the flames in the hearth lean and flicker. Elias sat at the table, his rifle within reach, one boot propped on the rung of the chair. Clara lay under the thick buffalo hide blanket, her breathing shallow but even. Every so often she'd stir, a faint sound slipping from her throat, half memory. He didn't plan on sleeping. Not with the riders out there. But as the hours dragged, he noticed something: the torches had vanished. No glow in the snowstorm, no shadows moving through the trees. That didn't mean they were gone. Men like Halle knew how to wait, near dawn. When the fire burned low, Clara stirred again. Her eyes opened slowly, finding his where he sat. "You haven't slept," she murmured. Elias gave a faint shake of his head. "You either." She pushed herself up on one elbow, the blanket slipping to reveal the edge of the raw brand. Her voice was steady when she asked, "Do you want to know the rest?" He didn't answer, but his silence was invitation enough. Her gaze dropped to the fire, as if it were easier to speak to the flames than to him. "The night they branded me." Her words faltered for a heartbeat, then found their way again. "They'd already decided I was guilty. I could see it in their faces. No trial, no chance to speak. They tied me to the hitching post outside the saloon. Everyone came to watch: men, women, even children." Her voice tightened. Halle held the iron himself. He wanted them to see it was him delivering justice. Elias said nothing, but his jaw set hard. He could picture it: the hiss of the hot iron, the stench of burning flesh, the crowd's murmur turning to silence. Some memories didn't belong to him, but he knew the weight of them all the same. Clara's eyes glistened in the firelight. "They left me there till nightfall. My father wouldn't even look at me. My mother, she cried, but she didn't speak. And when they cut me down, I didn't go home. I ran." She drew in a slow breath. I made it as far as the dry creek. Bed before I saw them, Apache scouts. At first, I thought they'd finish what the town claimed I'd started, but one of them stepped forward and I knew his face. The boy I'd saved. Older now, but I knew. He gave me water. Told me to go east away from the hunting parties. Her gaze shifted to Elias. They spared me. My own people wouldn't, but they did. For a moment, the only sound was the pop of a knot in the firewood. Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You believe they'll come here? Yes, she said without hesitation. Halle won't stop. Not until I'm dead. Not until the story ends the way he told it. Elias thought about the riders, their torches in the dark, the way they pushed through the storm. Men like that didn't turn back. If they weren't here yet, they were close. We can't stay. He said finally. There's an old mine shaft west of here. Narrow entrance. Easy to guard. You can hide there until they pass. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. You'd risk yourself for me? He met her gaze. I've seen what hate does when. It's left to run. You don't deserve to die for doing the right thing. By mid-morning, the snow had thinned to a brittle crust underfoot. Elias helped her bundle into his spare coat, the sleeves too long, the shoulders loose. She still moved, stiffly from the burns and bruises, but she didn't complain. They left the cabin quietly, their breath turning to ghosts in the cold air. The mine was less than a mile away, tucked into the base of a granite ridge where pine roots clawed the rock. Inside, it smelled of damp earth and rusting tools long abandoned. Elias cleared a corner for her, laid out a blanket, and set a small oil lamp on the ground. You stay here, he told her. I'll watch the trail. But Clara reached out, her fingers catching his wrist. There's more. He looked down at her, waiting. She took a breath, steadying herself. The night I warned the Apache, it wasn't just women and children in that camp. There were men warriors. They didn't attack first, but they were ready to defend themselves. When Halle and the others came, they fired back. Blood was spilled. My people died. And I. Her voice cracked, but she forced the words out. I pulled the trigger, too. Not to kill, just to stop Halle from cutting down a boy who couldn't have been more than 15, but I hit his arm. That's why he wants me dead. The admission hung between them like smoke. Elias's eyes didn't leave hers. That's not betrayal, he said quietly. That's survival. She gave a bitter laugh. Tell them that. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called sharp, urgent. Elias knew that sound didn't belong. The crow's cry faded into the wind. Elias's gaze swept the ridgeline, the snowy pines standing like silent sentinels. There, just for a heartbeat, he saw it. The flash of sunlight on metal. A rifle barrel. They were here. He turned to Clara. Thoda found us. Her jaw tightened, but her voice stayed steady. What do we do? Elias glanced toward the mine entrance. This place is defensible, but we'll need to work fast. Without waiting for her reply, he moved to the mouth of the shaft, scanning the slopes. Fresh tracks in the snow. 6, maybe 7 men. They'd spread out, moving in slow and careful, trying to choke off any escape. He stepped back inside, his boots crunching on gravel. Help me drag these timbers, he said. They were old mine supports, half-rotted but still heavy enough to serve as a barricade. Together they heaved them into place, stacking them waist-high across the entrance. The cold air bit at his lungs. Once they're close, we'll hold fire until we're sure of our shots. Clara picked up his spare rifle. It felt awkward in her hands, but she checked the chamber with the same determination she'd shown since the night he found her. I can shoot, she said. Elias gave her a single, sharp nod. I believe you. The snow-muted silence outside was the worst of it. No hoofbeats. No voices. just the whisper of wind through the trees. Then faint, but growing a crunch of boots on frozen ground. Elias leaned against the barricade, his rifle steady. Shadows began to move between the pines, 6 shapes. One leading, Holly. Elias's eyes narrowed. Holly wore a dark coat, Snow, crusted on the shoulders, and his rifle cradled in his arms. Even at a distance, Elias could see the pale line of the scar on Hale's forearm, the one Clara had given him. They were 50 yards away now. Elias waited. The first shot came from the right flank. A splinter burst from the mine's entrance post, stinging Elias's cheek. "Down," he barked. Clara dropped to one knee, leveling the rifle over the timber. Elias's return shot cracked through the cold air. One shadow dropped into the snow. The others scattered, shouting. Gunfire erupted, echoing between the cliffs. Elias worked the lever of his rifle, the motion smooth, automatic. Snow puffed into the air where bullets struck. Clara's shot rang out, and another man stumbled, clutching his side. 2 down, she said under her breath, as if counting. Might keep her fear at bay. Hale's voice cut through the chaos. "Bring me the girl. The mountain man's nothing without her." Elias's lip curled. "That so?" he muttered, sighting down his barrel. He squeezed the trigger. Holly jerked aside, the bullet grazing his shoulder, spinning him into the snow. He roared, half in pain, half in rage. They pressed harder now, trying to rush the entrance. Elias kicked over a bucket of loose rock they gathered, sending it tumbling down the slope toward the attackers. It slowed them, but only for seconds. One man reached the barricade, shoving his rifle through the gap. Clara swung the butt of her weapon, knocking it aside, then fired point blank. The man dropped. Smoke hung in the cold air, drifting between them and the enemy. Elias reloaded with quick, practiced movements, his fingers stiff from the cold. More. Shouting below, their numbers were thinner now. But Holly was still standing, still coming, then silence again. The kind that meant danger wasn't gone, just hiding. Elias motioned for Clara to stay low. He eased to the edge of the barricade, peering out. Holly was gone from sight. That meant only one thing he was circling. "Watch the back," Elias whispered. They retreated deeper into the mine, the light growing dim. The sound of boots on snow came from behind them now, echoing faintly through the shaft. Elias spun, firing down the narrow passage. The shot hit stone, sparks flaring in the dark. A voice Hale's laughed low. "You can't hide her forever, Kane." Clara's grip tightened on the rifle. Elias stepped forward. "Not hiding," he said, loud enough to carry. "Just making sure you understand she's under my protection." The laugh turned into a growl. Holly charged, emerging from the shadows, pistol raised. Elias fired. The bullet caught Holly in the leg, dropping him to one knee. He tried to aim, but Clara's shot came an instant later. It struck true. Holly fell forward into the snow at the mine's mouth, the white stained red beneath him. For a long moment, nothing moved. The wind sighed through the pines again, as if the mountain itself had released a breath it had been holding. Elias lowered his rifle. "It's over," he said quietly. Clara stared at Hale's still form, her chest rising and falling fast. Her hand The snow had stopped falling. The mountain air carried a brittle, crystalline stillness. In that stillness, the only sound was Clara's breathing slow, uneven. She stood at the mine entrance, eyes fixed on Hale's lifeless body. The brand on her skin itched, though the wound was long closed. Her fingers loosened around the rifle, letting it hang at her side. Elias came to stand beside her. His shoulder throbbed from the bullet graze, but his voice was steady. "It's done." She turned her head slightly, as if weighing the truth of those words. The sky above was painted with streaks of gold and gray, the kind of light that meant the day was surrendering to night. Elias watched the horizon, knowing it would be their first peaceful sunset in days. "I thought killing him would make me feel free," Clara said. Her voice cracked, not from tears, but from the exhaustion of too many miles and too much hate. "Now," she added, "I just feel empty." Elias didn't offer false comfort. He knew that kind of emptiness. It came after the fight, after the blood. When the noise faded and the ghosts started talking again. "You'll fill it," he said finally. "With what?" she asked. "Whatever you want to live for next." They spent the next hours burying the bodies in the frozen earth, one shallow grave after another, Elias working with grim efficiency. Clara helped, though her hands blistered and bled in the cold. Neither of them spoke much. There was nothing to say that the snow and wind didn't already know. When the last mound was smoothed over, Clara stood for a moment with her head bowed. The mountains loomed above, massive and eternal, watching without judgment. She took a deep breath, her breath clouding in the fading light. That night, Elias built a fire outside the mine, its glow casting a small circle of warmth in the vast cold. Clara sat close, her legs tucked beneath her, the flames painting her face in shifting orange and gold. The scarred letters on her skin were hidden beneath her sleeve, but she could still feel them. "They called me an Apache lover, like it was something filthy," she said quietly. Elias tossed another log on the fire. "Kindness is never filthy," he said. "Out here, it's rarer than gold." She looked at him then, really looked, not just at the trapper who'd pulled her from death, but at the man who'd stood between her and a dozen bullets. "You could have let them take me," she said. "I've done my share of leaving people behind," he answered. "I'm done with that." In the days that followed, the snow began to melt in patches, revealing the dark, rich soil beneath. Elias took her on short walks through the pines, showing her where the springs ran and where the game moved. She learned how to mend snares, how to split kindling with a single sharp strike, how to listen to the forest's language. One morning, she woke before Elias and climbed the ridge behind the cabin. From there she could see for miles snow-capped. Peaks, silver rivers winding through valleys, a sky so wide it seemed to pull the breath right out of her. She closed her eyes, letting the wind wash over her, and for the first time in months her shoulders loosened. The brand on her skin was still there. It would fade, but never vanish entirely. She realized she didn't need it gone. It was proof, not of shame, but of survival. By spring, the cabin felt less like a hiding place and more like a home. Elias built her a small table from pine boards. Planed smooth and sturdy, she began keeping a ledger of the traps they set, the herbs they gathered, the storms they weathered. Her handwriting was careful, each letter an act of claiming her own story. One afternoon, as the last snows retreated into the shadowed gullies, Elias found her sitting on the porch, carving something into a small piece of wood. "What's that?" he asked. She turned it toward him, a simple mountain scene with two tiny figures side by side. "It's us," she said. He smiled, a rare thing on his weathered face. They didn't speak much of the fight on the mountain anymore. The past had a way of staying alive if you fed it too often. Instead, they spoke of the garden they'd plant when the soil thawed, and the smokehouse Elias wanted to rebuild. When summer finally came, wildflowers exploded across the meadow's yellows, blues and reds waving in the breeze. Clara walked through them barefoot, the sun warm on her face. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth, and she felt the weight she'd carried for so long begin to dissolve. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, she stood beside Elias at the edge of the ridge. The valley below glowed with the last light of day. She reached out, taking his hand without looking at him. He didn't pull away. "This is home now," she said. Elias gave a slow nod. Then it settled. The mountains had been her prison, once cold, remote, unforgiving. Now they were her shelter, her witness, and her proof that she had survived. The brand might still whisper its old lie to anyone who looked closely, but up here, under the open sky, she didn't need to explain a damn thing. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The sound was wild and free. Clara smiled, the firelight of the setting sun in her eyes. She was no longer just the girl they had tried to break.